I guess we aren't getting more of that for copyright reasons. Howdy, everybody. So Criterion recently announced that they're doing a 4K release of Risky Business this summer. And because I've been blasting through Tom Cruise's filmography and haven't gotten up to that one yet, I thought it'd be fun to sit down and finally watch it. And you want to know what was the overriding thought I had during my screening of it? Other than the obvious question as to whether or not I could pull off a sports coat over a t-shirt like Joel does in the movie. Which, to answer the question for those of you who actually care, is, yeah, I don't know, maybe? I probably need to see a trailer first, but yeah, I think I could do it. No, it was actually that the movie happened to have an eerie amount in common with another Tom Cruise vehicle that I had only just gotten around to seeing in the past year. Cocktail. No, wait, that isn't right. It's the one with Nicole Kidman in it. Not Days of Thunder, not the other one. Eyes Wide Shut. I'm talking about Eyes Wide Shut.
For the uninitiated, Risky Business is a 1983 coming-of-age comedy that was written and directed by Paul Brickman. The film follows a high school senior named Joel Goodson, who gets into all sorts of trouble in his well-off family's home while they're away on vacation. The movie was Tom Cruise's breakout role and is considered by many to be one of the quintessential teen movies from the era that arguably has the highest number of iconic teen movies per capita. Critics loved it, with Roger Ebert comparing it favorably to the likes of The Graduate. Audiences lapped it up thanks to its playful tone and banging soundtrack, and the now famous old-time rock and roll scene has been parodied and referenced regularly for the past 40 years. And like I just said a minute ago, one of the things that stood out to me during my first watch-through of it was how similar it is to Eyes Wide Shut, a 1999 film that also happens to star one Mr. Ethan Hunt. That movie, the last film ever directed by Stanley Kubrick no less, follows Cruise through a marital crisis after finding out that his wife had considered cheating on him in the past. Though not without its touches of humor at points, it's a dramatic and epic story about fidelity, classism in the form of the secret society Cruise encounters in the film, as well as secrets and conspiracy. On the surface, these movies probably don't seem that similar. One is a playful teen comedy, and the other is an epic piece of psychological cinema that skirts easy genre classification and was a long gestating project created by one of the medium's best directors. But once you crack their noggins open and get all their spaghetti-like brains out of the way, it's actually pretty surprising how interchangeable both of these movies are. To the point where I'd even go as far as to only half-jokingly call Risky Business a sort of Eyes Wide Shut for teenagers. After all, it's a movie that runs with several of the same ideas as the Kubrick Swan Song did, but does it in a much clearer, more direct and easy to parse way. It's a more traditional and fun movie, which means that it would probably appeal to a younger audience. If Eyes Wide Shut is a confusing monolith that has a million different valid analyses available for it, Risky Business is the dry run that doesn't take itself so seriously and is a lot more literal. And because of this, perhaps choosing to view it as a companion piece to the Kubrick film will grant us some greater understanding of some of its themes, or at least allow us to land on a new, interesting interpretation of it.
So today, I thought I'd do just that. Because why not? It sounded like a fun, unique idea for a video. Additionally, it just felt like a good excuse to formally introduce a segment I want to do called Double Feature Theater. An idea I've technically already done back in my Spider-Man and the Matrix video, where I take two movies that at least seemingly don't have that much in common and slowly expose the fact that they actually pair about as well as some wines and cheeses do.
In order to adequately make my case about how similar these films are, I'd first like to summarize what they're ostensibly about. As I said earlier, Risky Business is a coming-of-age movie about a wild series of events that occur after Joel Goodson's parents leave town for a couple of days. Said events include taking his father's Porsche out on a joyride, hiring a sex worker and then getting entangled in her world, and Joel trying to find his way and grow into a more responsible person that can get into Princeton in the process. As far as structure goes, it's fairly simple and has even simpler stakes. Joel has threatened the safety of his home life by acting, as the title implies, somewhat riskily, and is doing the exact opposite of what his parents think he would. It's a great avenue to explore themes of rebellious youth, sexual maturation, and even morality given its very casual depiction of sex work. Likewise, Eyes Wide Shut can just as easily work under the title Risky Business. Cruise's character in that one is named Dr. William Harford, or Bill as he's referred to within the screenplay and throughout the movie itself. He's a respected, well-off doctor that's married and has a kid. He lives in Manhattan and is the type of guy who gets invited to cushy holiday parties.
Why do you think Ziegler invites us to these things every year?
This is what you get for making house calls.
Despite exuding that oh-so-Cruisian charisma at the party and being somewhat open to flirting with guests, he's something of a family man until his entire worldview gets challenged by the revelation that his wife had once thought about sleeping with another man. This sends him on a sorta nightmare of ecstasy where he meets a sex worker, infiltrates a sex cult, and, depending on who you ask and how you choose to interpret the film itself, either basically sells his daughter to said cult or comes out the other side with a better understanding of fidelity.
At the center of both movies is Tom Cruise, with Cruise being about 20 years old when he shot Risky Business and him being close to or around 37 when he was working on Eyes Wide Shut. And I only bring up their age difference here because I think it actually plays into how different but alike these two movies are. You see, I originally got the idea for this video from a joke I made in my Letterboxd review for Risky Business where I called it the prequel to Eyes Wide Shut. But here's the thing. You could totally read it as being exactly that.
Cruise's presence in both roles, at two decidedly different points in his life and career no less, has this oddly exaggerating effect on their similarities. It bridges both movies in a way that may not have happened had one of them starred someone else. Things that may or may not have only been fun coincidences suddenly fit together in a way that feels thematically compatible, and like there's a non-zero chance that some of this might have been intentional. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying that Stanley Kubrick was a huge Risky Business guy and that he deliberately mirrored his adaptation of Arthur Schnitzler's 1926 novella Dream Story on it or anything, though wouldn't that have been hilarious? I'm simply saying that Cruise being here lends itself to these comparisons being drawn between both films in the first place. Whether conscious or not, casting matters. Actors bring a certain level of baggage to any role they sign on to play. We typecast actors because they fit into certain parts better than others, and that baggage can absolutely get used to help or hurt a story. Take away the obvious inconsistencies between both flicks, such as character names, locations, and the fact that Bill is a doctor and Joel wanted to become a businessman, and you have two guys that could have been the same person at some point in time. Joel has a childish naivete and emotional vulnerability to himself that's juxtaposed against his desire to grow up, get laid, and hang with the big dogs, while simultaneously helping people along the way.
I mean, doesn't anyone want to accomplish anything, or do we just want to make money?
Make money.
Just make money.
Yeah. Make a lot of money.
What about you, Joel?
Serve my fellow mankind.
Oh,
Thank you for that. Good. Get out of here.
And Bill isn't all that different from him. He just has approximately 20 more years of life experience under his belt. He's a doctor, so he's taken the Hippocratic Oath, which means that he wants to help people just like Joel does. And he also has this certain naive streak about him that gets expressed through gestures like brandishing his medical license like it's a police badge or sneaking around past dark. They're both dissatisfied and insecure about something in their lives and want to project a stronger image of themselves to the world. If Joel is trying to act the part of an adult by driving his dad's Porsche around, Bill is trying to act like an adult in high society by wearing a literal mask over his face. They even both conflate a night with a sex worker as a means of accomplishing their goals, and stumble their way through these encounters because, at least at this part in their stories, it isn't them. So it's not that far of a logic leap to see these two characters being the same guy at different points of their lives. Joel is your typical teenage boy who's experiencing the type of crisis that many people his age go through. He's unsure about his future, and he wants to do everything in his power to make sure that he's successful, but he also just wants to cut loose, live a little, and have sex. In fact, his teenage libido is the first thing we learn about his character thanks to the opening scene of Risky Business being a fantasy sequence. It's only after falling over himself and making every mistake in the book that he grows into the type of person he wants to be. On the other side of the aisle, Bill is clearly going through some kind of early midlife crisis. He has a beautiful home, a beautiful wife, and is shown to be a somewhat present father despite his very demanding job. By all accounts, the life we see him live is relatively good. But the second anything even begins to challenge that, he reverts to acting like a teenager again. Bill makes the move from being a person who embodies a cool sense of being in control to a child wearing his father's clothes. He tries so hard to rekindle some of his former Tom Cruise in the late 90s-ness and fails so hard at it. Furthermore, it doesn't take a particularly keen eye to realize that his quote-unquote perfect life at the start of the film is one that only exists due to omission on his part. I mean, the guy flips his lid after his wife mentions having a libido that exists outside of his unperipheral, very close-minded view of their relationship and women in general. It's not only that he can't comprehend the idea that his wife is a three-dimensional person and doesn't simply exist to be faithful to him, it's that he seems to, at least vaguely, subscribe to the idea that women in general should bow to men. Hell, the first image in the movie is literally a sexually framed shot of his wife Alice disrobing. An action that is similar to the way that all of the women disrobe at the party that occurs halfway through the film, which I think can be read as the suggestion that Alice exists as a composite of those characters in the eye of her husband, that she's akin to a trophy for men to ogle.
What did he want?
What did he want? What did he want? Sex.
I guess that's understandable.
Understandable.
Because you are a very, very beautiful woman.
Whoa.
Even the idea of these characters wearing a figurative mask as they attempt to find their way is mirrored in both movies' party sequences. In Risky Business, Joel ends up throwing a rager at his house and turns the place into a brothel. The flick plays it off as a kinda cool, wild moment for the character that allows him to do one of the things he's expressed some interest in doing earlier in the movie, which is run a successful business. Basically, Joel has dug himself into a massive hole, or dropped the Porsche into a massive body of water if we want to get specific, and needs to claw his way back to safety by getting his hands dirty. This means teaming up with Lana and her other sex worker gal pals and filling a hole in the market. No pun intended, which they decide means getting high schoolers to solicit sex from adults. But this new identity clearly isn't the best fit for Joel. While it helps him get his Porsche fixed and nets him $8,000 in a single night, it also lands him in hot water with a pimp, who strips his house bare and forces him to spend his earnings on getting his stuff back. And while the events of Eyes Wide Shut's party scene don't go down exactly like that, that movie also features a parallel by straight up featuring an orgy sex cult that I have to be very choosy about cutting to unless I want to get this video flagged. In that film, Cruise's character is distraught over his wife's revelation from earlier and infiltrates the party wearing a disguise. It's a very literal moment for a movie that can be read in a myriad of ways. He doesn't belong to the community that runs the place, but he wants them to think that he does. And while he does his best to look the part, nobody really buys his disguise. He's forced to leave, and just like in Risky Business, where Joel then had to contend with the pimp, is shocked by the repercussions of his actions.
Also, and this doesn't count as a real similarity between the two movies, but both the pimp and the Secret Society could have just shot Tom Cruise, right? I hate to make another Austin Powers reference so soon after my Something Wild video, but they totally could have just 86'd the guy.
I have a gun in my room. You give me 5 seconds, I'll get it. I'll come back down here. Boom! I'll blow their brains out.
Scott, you just don't get it, do you?
Guido the pimp, real name by the way, literally owns a gun. It would have taken 2 seconds for him to bust the door down, shoot Tom in the crew neck, and then rob the place. Likewise, the Secret Society is heavily implied to have, if not all but confirmed to have, killed 2 people in Eyes Wide Shut. But if they were gonna kill somebody and then send Bill a message to keep away, why not just kill him too? Either way, both sequences end the same basic way, with the people who do belong there ultimately sending our protagonist the painful message that he needs to make like vapor and dissipate into thin air. But thankfully, they both also got out of things relatively unscathed. Joel ultimately gets all of his things back, ends on good terms with Lana, and gets into Princeton. Bill doesn't get killed by the cult, has a crisis of conscience with his wife and tells her everything, and the two of them reconcile and return to their marriage-changed people. And while I know I've been fixating on our protagonists a lot today, that isn't even all of their similarities. Take, for instance, Tom Cruise's performances in both projects. Despite the fact that Cruise just plain delivers good work in both roles, the choices he makes as an actor honestly gives me the impression that he played Bill Harvard as a permutation of the Joel Goodson character. Here's what got me here. I took a few acting classes in college. In fact, it's actually where I met several of my best friends to this day, and Tom Cruise's work in Eyes Wide Shut immediately reminded me of one of the first things I learned about screen acting, which is to remember to dial your performances down since you're on camera. Basically, because a camera can get placed anywhere in proximity to a performer, a smaller, more nuanced approach to acting is preferable in many situations. After all, the cinematographer, the director, and the editor can dictate how large you'll need to be through the magic of cinema. It's nothing like stage acting where your performance needs to be visible to everyone from the front seat over to the nosebleeds. And Cruise's performance here, which is one that some have complained about over the past 25 years, kinda rejects this advice. He doesn't fall into the realm of broad vaudevillian comedy or anything, but he definitely does feel a bit like he has a tendency to chew the scenery. And seeing as we're talking about a notorious perfectionist like Kubrick, you could bet that was probably intentional. Especially since some of the earlier incarnations of Eyes Wide Shut even had him consider everyone from Woody Allen to Steve Martin, Bill Murray, and Tom Hanks for the part of Bill.
Either way, his performance reminds me of the sort of one you might squeeze out of a newer actor who hasn't worked that many gigs yet or hasn't learned how to execute more restraint while they're on camera. A person like Tom Cruise back when he was in Risky Business.
In his 2018 article about Risky Business for Collider, Matt Goldberg said something that really stood out to me. It goes something like, "When I say that the meekness of Joel contrasts wildly against the rest of Cruise's career, I don't mean to imply that he doesn't have range. But if you look at the overview of Cruise's career, he usually plays confident, assured characters. By comparison, Joel never has the advantage. From the start of the movie to the finish, everyone pretty much walks all over him. Joel spends the entire movie just trying to break even, and gets ahead mostly from luck and because he got the college admissions guy laid." I think this statement's great because he's right on the money. I just explained how actors bring baggage to the roles they take on, either for better or for worse. And the baggage that Cruise seems to bring to Eyes Wide Shut is that he's basically playing what the article might call a loser for the first time in years. The article points out that his Risky Business character isn't holding on to grief like his parts in Magnolia or Minority Report did, nor does he ever become a hero. And the same holds true to Eyes Wide Shut. William tries to play himself off as being heroic at points, but it never fully clicks. He's just a guy, and it's one of maybe several times in Cruise's career that he's allowed himself to be just that. A normal, flawed person who doesn't really exhibit any sort of exemplary traits, but also isn't an astoundingly shitty person like his character in Magnolia or his character in Collateral. Tangentially, this is also why I haven't brought up Cruise's portrayal of Jerry Maguire yet either, despite the character also sorta having Joel but an adult energy. In that movie, he's explicitly written as being the best of the best at what he does. In fact, the very issue he has in the movie is that he's developed a conscience that compels him to do the heroic task of caring about his clients and trying to be a generally better, less shallow person. The character is as Cruisian as they come, to the point of him having a visceral reaction to the simple idea of him being called a loser. The very thing that Joel and Bill kind of are in their movies.
You are not a loser.
Who said anything about loser?
Mistake. I meant something else.
And this general loseriness even gets parroted in his performance. He's always moving his hands around and doing something interesting because Bill doesn't know what to do in the situation he's in. And that's just like Joel in Risky Business, where he's also a bit of a fish out of water given the company he's found himself in. And that's not to say that these performances are bad or anything. They're actually quite good because they accomplish everything they need to. After all, Risky Business is a comedy, so of course Cruise was gonna play some of this stuff large. But thankfully, he also feels like an authentic teenager in how in over his head and artificially comes across as being. Bill also feels properly in over his head due to the way that Cruise handles the material. He's a man who thought he understood the world and is suddenly coming to understand that he, in fact, doesn't. so a lot of Cruise's choices as a performer feel adequately shocked and confused. Additionally, the characters don't stand out when compared to everyone they're surrounded by. Everybody in both of these movies are basically playing heightened or intentionally stiff roles. The overall baselines for the worlds of Risky Business and Eyes Wide Shut are decidedly slant, so nothing stands out as being inappropriate, and when it does, it's probably the point. In fact, let's get into the tones of both films. Despite being a comedy, Risky Business is also kind of dark. It features sex workers and their pimps. Sure, they aren't a major thematic focus in the movie, and they're not really focused on outside of Joel's story, but there's a certain seediness that they lend to things through their presence. Additionally, large swaths of this thing take place at night, and there's a few moments where the footage gets undercranked and played back to us in slow motion, two things that elicit a vaguely dreamlike mise-en-scène. Joel even has several dream sequences throughout the movie that, while more teenage daydream or horned-up fantasy than moody surrealist jaunt, still add to this feeling. As for Eyes Wide Shut, it's much more explicitly dreamlike. Because it was shot on sound stages in London, shots like Cruise walking through the city are accomplished with rear projection and sets that go out of their way to recreate Manhattan. The efforts made by the team behind this movie are undeniably impressive and mostly stick the landing, but there are still moments that don't feel natural. It was also shot underexposed and pushed in post, which gave the film a certain murkiness, like a dream that we're straining to remember. There are even fantasy sequences that plague Bill throughout the course of the film. He's actively haunted by images of his wife Alice being ravaged by the man she told him about, and it's the exact kind of porno-ready fantasy that Joel was having in the other movie. As for what might be my favorite shot in Eyes Wide Shut, well, not only does that have a piercing, dreamlike quality to it, but it even has a direct parallel in Risky Business. It's from the scene when Bill gets home from work the day after his first excursion. Alice is tending to their kid while he makes a stop at the fridge, and they briefly lock eyes. She looks back at him with this ambiguous expression on her face, which has a deeply unsettling undertone to it thanks to some repeated voiceover from earlier in the film.
Everyone was fucking. And then I was fucking other men.
The shot-reverse shot structure of it is an awesome take on the Kuleshov effect due to how inherently biased it is. Because we only know what Bill is thinking, we're led to believe that the look is somewhat goading or taunting. But any level of scrutiny on our parts reminds us that it's probably more open to interpretation than that. Is Alice really thinking about the man she almost threw her marriage away over? Does she somehow know where Bill was last night? Or, is she just staring at her husband fondly? Without any context from her point of view, we just don't know. We can only infer that it's something nefarious given the framing and the fact that it's Kubrick's signature shot, but we'll never be sure. After all, Eyes Wide Shut might be about conspiracies, so what if Kubrick's just fucking with us? And likewise, we just don't know what the subject of its Risky Business counterpart is thinking either. After turning his house into a brothel, Joel and Lana run to the L in Chicago to do the nasty. However, they're interrupted by the stare of a homeless man sitting on the train. It's just like in Bill's kitchen. We're treated to shots of him staring at Joel until he forces him off of it. Through the quick exchange of a shot and a reverse shot, we're told a lot about both of Tom Cruise's characters and how insecure they feel at the moment. It's a simple shot, but it's interesting how they both cropped up in a similarly unsettling way across both movies. Another similarity between these flicks are the scenes that show how both Tom Cruise's lives have been flipped upside down from their experiences. Joel sounds like a raving lunatic in one scene when he tries to explain why he missed school, as well as when he's straight up trying to get boys to go to his party. And Bill is literally worked to the point of having a mental breakdown in his wife's arms after everything he's put himself through. Worse, they're both completely to blame for everything that happened. They were both so compelled by their respective dreams and nightmares that they've gotten into the habit of continually digging themselves into a bigger hole. Hell, they're practically compelled to by the ethos of Risky Business itself, a quote that keeps returning again and again with little variation.
Every now and then, say what the fuck. What the fuck gives you freedom? Freedom brings opportunity. Opportunity makes your future.
Put another way, it's a call to action to roll with the punches and shoot your shot because you'll never know how things turn out for you if you don't. The philosophy seemingly serves both characters well to a point, as it does lead to Joel getting into Princeton like he wanted to, and it does ultimately lead to Bill and Alice patching things up, but it does also lead to what could best be described as bittersweet endings for both of them. Like, Risky Business paints Joel's actions out as being fun, wild, and awesome, but if you take a step back and actually look at them, they're pretty skeevy. He became a quintessentially 80s businessman and how corrupt he got, and the movie plays it off as him coming of age. And like, that isn't me condemning sex work or anything like that because you do you and all. I'm condemning the fact that he trashed his dad's car, almost certainly sold sex to at least one minor, put Lori Loughlin to shame with how he bribed a college official, and endangered his family by inadvertently showing a pimp that has a firearm where he lives. The movie shows that this all ultimately worked out in his favor, yeah, but any level of scrutiny would also expose that he may not have grown up as much as its creator wants you to think he has. And Bill is really no different. The actions he takes over the course of the film have very serious ramifications. He might be responsible for up to 2 deaths. A cult that may or may not have been aware of him and his wife, depending on your interpretation of the material, has potentially broken into his home. And again, depending on how you interpret the ending and if you subscribe to a popular theory about it, he may have even pimped his daughter out just like the costume shop owner did earlier in the film. The only difference here is that it's up to the audience whether or not that's how they want to read the material. You could just as easily confirm that he's only responsible for 1 or no deaths. And you could also argue that Alice might have simply found his mask and laid it out on the bed for him too, as well as that their daughter hasn't been abducted. Which, for the record, I think is the case. Like, I don't think any of those things were directly tied to the sex cult he walked in on. I think he's just paranoid and worried that he's about to ruin his life, and he's just reaching and grabbing for some greater answer to everything so that he doesn't have to blame himself. But even if you choose to do that, it's not like Bill has gotten through things unscathed or become a better person. Whichever way you cut the stuff I just mentioned, he's still aware that someone else's underage daughter is engaging in sex work, but seemingly hasn't done anything about it. And if you believe that those 2 people were killed because of him, he could have theoretically helped prove that this happened, but doesn't.
Both characters haven't actually become better people or learned any kind of uplifting message by the end of these movies. They've just accepted that the world is a cold, dark place where the best thing they can do is play the game on their terms and hope the medicine goes down smooth. To be especially blunt about it, they've both come to understand that risk is the name of business and that they best keep their eyes wide shut. Wow. Yeah. I'd say I need better writers, but that was me. That was all me. The only way I could get a better writer is if I self-immolate or something. And even then, I think I'm just stuck with myself.
Risky Business's sentiment that people just need to say what the fuck from time to time is even mirrored in the final scene of Eyes Wide Shut. While they're at the toy store, Alice and Bill talk about their experiences and how they should be grateful that they've come out the other side of it in one piece. It's a conversation about how they should choose to forgive and forget what they've been through and just focus on what's in front of them. Each other.
Maybe. I think we should be grateful. Grateful that we've managed to survive through all of our adventures.
Alice then says that they need to do something as soon as possible, and when Bill prompts her to tell him what it is, she simply utters,
"Fuck."
In a piece of cinema that has revolved around sex and intimacy like the Earth circles the sun, the message is clear. The only thing they can do after everything Bill has been through is point their gaze at each other. To just be together, let things happen, and watch how the dice rolls from there. Their marriage isn't magically fixed by the end of the movie, but redirecting their sexuality towards each other after a couple hours worth of a movie that has had them express it towards anyone but each other might be the thing that gets this train back on the right track. Similarly, Joel and Lana end Risky Business's theatrical ending by mirroring one of their first conversations. They're similarly seeing each other eye to eye now, and it's all handled with a sexual and romantic subtext.
Spent the evening together?
I'd really like that. How much you got on you?
How much have I got on me? I got $20.
$20, Lynn? What are we gonna do about this?
Just like with Bill and Alice, they're choosing to ignore the ugliness of the world and playfully choosing to push ahead with each other in spite of the mess Joel had just been put through. So what does it mean to call Risky Business Eyes Wide Shut for teenagers? Well, for starters, it doesn't just mean that they're both movies that feature Tom Cruise. His performance and presence in them are certainly a huge part of that comparison, yeah, but it also runs deeper than that. It's about the themes expressed in both flicks, how they use similar cinematic languages at points, and equate sex with power and that power with danger. And like I just said, it's even about how they end on similarly hollow, vaguely doomed notes. I think that to compare them is to compare the way that people don't really change over time. Sure, they might get taller or lose some of their hair or something, but the human condition is still ultimately the human condition no matter your age. I feel like these characters express a cycle of sorts. When you're young, you want to act the part of the big, powerful businessman. And when you're older, you might find yourself reverting to the way you acted as a teenager. At any rate, I think one of the takeaways I had making this video, as well as just watching Risky Business for the first time, was that it's still a surprisingly relevant film. I'm fairly confident the teens are still going to be able to look at Joel and his desire to be somebody and see a bit of themselves in him. In the same way that Eyes Wide Shut taps into male insecurity and the sense of conspiracy we lean towards when confronted with something we don't understand, Risky Business taps into pubescent insecurity and the looming fear of adulthood. It doesn't need to have a secret society like Eyes does. It has sex work, a businessed-up version of the end result of puberty and one's sexual coming of age. And for a character who openly spends the first third of the movie fantasizing about that, that may as well be a secret cult that's lurking in the shadows.
So the next time you sit down to watch one of these two movies, I suggest that you consider making them into a double feature. Now, whether that means spreading them across 2 nights or literally double featuring them, that's up to you, but I think you'll find that they pair extremely well. If you do decide to watch them back to back though, it's a great experience. Risky Business is a great movie to start a night off on because it's a comedy, and then by the time that one's over and you decide to boot Eyes Wide Shut up, I'm sorry, Eyes Wide Shut Up, that's just funny. Once you're ready to boot Eyes Wide Shut Up, you'll be in a similar state to the one Bill found himself in because you've already sat through a 2-hour movie. You're perfectly primed to enter this sort of pseudo fugue state. They complement each other and they give you a surprisingly coherent view of what the ripple effects of life may be like close to 20 years apart. Or hell, maybe I'm just Jack reaching. Anyway, that brings us to the end of this video. If you dig what I did here and you happen to like podcasts, I highly recommend checking out my 2 podcasts, Media Obscura and Glaring Admissions. Media Obscura is a show dedicated to watching and discussing old and obscure movies and television, while Glaring Admissions is me and my friend Raekwon taking a look at iconic, classic movies that one of us has never seen before. They live on the same RSS feed, so if you check out Media Obscura, you're basically also checking out the other one. We also do full video episodes that get uploaded to this channel. On top of that, if you're a reader and you like reading because you're a reader who does reading things, you could also check out my novel Guppy Falls. It's available on Kindle Unlimited right now and is a friends to lovers coming-of-age romantic comedy set in 2013. So yeah. Bye.
Now give me the number so I can call her back.
What number? There's no number. Give me the number, goddammit. I'm telling you.
Miles.
There's no number.
You're an asshole.
Gotta go. Check you later.